Good evening, everyone. I am thrilled to see so many enthusiastic students here tonight. My name is Aishwarya Avzalpurkar, and I am here to kick off your exciting month long campaign, Tech Winter Break. Forget the typical winter break lull. This is your chance to supercharge your skills and climb the ranks in the world of Google. We are in for a month of learning, problem solving, and pushing our boundaries. Today's agenda is the HTML basics, CSS basics, and JavaScript basics with a live demo from scratch by our speaker Madhur Chandatre. Madhur may be a fellow second year student of RH Support College of Engineering, but his knowledge and passion for computer science are truly exceptional. He is a master of object oriented programming principles, building languages like C, C, Java, and Python with remarkable expertise. Currently, he is diving into the world of JavaScript, giving us a fantastic opportunity to learn alongside him as he expands his skill set. Beyond coding, Madhur also shines as a talented web designer. Let's give Madhur a warm welcome. We are eager to hear his insights and soak up his knowledge. Please join me in inviting him to the stage. Madhur, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Aishwarya, for the wonderful introduction. And hello, everyone. Today we'll be discussing the basics of front-end development. We'll be exploring how HTML, CSS, and JavaScript work together to create interactive and visually appealing web pages. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll have a foundational understanding of how to create your own web projects. So, what is web development? Web development is basically the process of creating websites and web applications. For example, YouTube, Amazon, Flipkart, these are all websites hosted on the internet, and these are created using web development. Now, there are two main parts of web development. First is front end, and the next is back end. Now, front end is what the user sees and what the user interacts with. Uh, Front end is generally written using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And the next part is backend. Backend is basically the server side logic. And backend is also responsible for storing the user data. And yeah, so for this session, due to limited time, we're going to be focusing on front end only. Before we dive into front end, there are three main structures of front end that we need to understand. As we mentioned earlier, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So, what is HTML? HTML, or hypertext markup language, handles the main structure and content of the web page. Any main information that you see, any content that you want to be displayed on the web page is handled using or is written inside HTML. HTML is also the backbone of web development. Now, the next is CSS. CSS, or cascading style sheets, handles the design and layout of the web page or the website. There are three main types of CSS: inline, internal, and external. We'll be looking into that later. Inline is basically inside the element style attribute. Internal is using the style tag, which is provided by HTML, and external, which is you write the CSS properties in a separate file and you link it to your HTML document. Now, the next is JavaScript. JavaScript adds interactivity and dynamic functionality to the website. There are, for this session, the main topic regarding to JavaScript will be events. Two main events that we're going to be looking into: on click and on mouse over. So on click, as the name suggests, is triggered when an element is clicked, and on mouse over is triggered when the mouse hovers over an element. So let's get into the demo, and we'll be looking. Let's first take a look at what we're going to create today. So let me share my screen. I hope the screen is visible. So this is what we're going to create today. It might look like a normal registration form, but I have added a bunch of functionality using JavaScript. So let's take a quick overview of this, and then we'll write the same, create this web page from scratch. So yeah, we're going to take four things as input: the name, phone number, email, and the engineering year. This is going to be a drop down box, and as you can see, when all the details are filled, the register button expands and you can finally register. Now let's say someone enters the phone number, but they only enter 9 digits. So now it's not, it shows that I'm not allowed to register. And even if I click, in spite of that, it gives me an alert saying that my details are incomplete or invalid. So I need to check those details. And once I check those and correct the details, I can register and it shows me that my submission was successful. Now that is the first thing we have done using JavaScript. We are checking the validity of the form, and if the form is valid, we are changing the appearance of the button. The next thing we have done using JavaScript is we are keeping a count of the number of students that have registered. So currently only one student registered, so the count has incremented to one. The next thing is a full screen mode. If the user solely wants to focus on the form and nothing else regarding the web page, then we have provided a full screen mode. It can go back to the default view. And the last thing is show registered students. Now you can see the name John. Now this is not a good practice. Ideally you shouldn't show the data of the students or the applicants, but this is just to give you a rough idea of how you can hide elements and display them on click. So yeah, let's get into it. We're gonna now create an HTML file. We'll first get into HTML, then we'll add the design and layout using CSS, and finally we'll add functionality using JavaScript. So if you use VS Code, first of all, any file, any HTML document that you need to create needs to be saved with the .html extension. So once you've done that, and if you have VS Code, you can use this shortcut call where you use an exclamation mark, and if you enter, this is what you'll see. So don't worry, I'll explain the whole thing. And if you're using Sublime Text, you can just type HTML and hit enter. You'll see the same thing. So this is called the boilerplate of HTML. A boilerplate is basically the default tags that are needed in every HTML document. Now we'll start one by one. Doc type HTML, we all know this declaration, but we don't know what it does. So doc type HTML basically provides the browser with tells the browser what version of HTML you are using. If you don't provide this declaration, the web page might be rendered in a quarks mode. Now quarks mode is basically when the web page does not follow HTML and CSS specifications. So it might get rendered in an unformatted way or in a way which you don't want it to. So the next is HTML tag. Now this can be set to be the root tag or the root node inside which everything related to HTML is written. It has a property called language, where you specify the language in which the content of the elements needs to be written. So the default is English. So even if you don't write this, it is going to be rendered in English. Now inside the HTML tag, we have two main tags: the head tag and the body tag. So to put it in one line, head tag stores the information about the web page and body tag stores the information inside the web page. Whatever information you want to be displayed on the web page is stored inside the body tag or is defined inside the body tag, and any information related to the web page is defined inside the head tag. Now we see three tags over here. Two of them are meta tags. Now meta tags are tags which store metadata. Now, I know that's confusing, but metadata is basically information about the data. For example, the first tag has an attribute. Attribute is basically properties of those tags. Now, char set is the first attribute that we are looking into. Char set is basically character set. Character set defines which character set we are using for the data. We are using UTF-8, which is Unicode Transformation Format 8. This character set includes almost all characters in the world, and you can even use emojis on your web page using this character set. The next is name is equals to viewport. Now, this is an attribute which is needed when your web page is going to be accessed on different devices. Now, it basically renders the web page according to the width of the device. So if you open the web page on your phone, it will be rendered according to the width of the phone. The formatting will be done according to the width of the phone. So these are the basic, this is the basic information that you need to define about your web page. And the next is title. Title is very important because title is basically uh, what is provided over here. See, I'm using VS Code, so you can see a live server, or you can see the live changes over here. Now, title, the default is document, so you can see document over here. Title is very important for search engine optimization. So, if you want your web page or website to be easily accessible on the internet, so you need to have a relevant title relating to your web page. So, we are creating a registration form. So we'll keep that as a registration form. It got updated over there. Now we'll see what we want to write in the body tag. So we first want a main heading for our web page, which is going to be GDGC GSCOA, which will be the main heading. And then we have a subheading, which specifies what the web page is about. So if there are 6 types of headings that HTML provides, H1 through H6, and as the number increases, the size decreases. So H1, as you can see, is the biggest size. It is usually used for the main heading of the web page, and H2 is the relatively smaller, and as you go down, H6 is the smallest subheading available. So we have created 2 headings. Now we're gonna assign a class to those headings. Now don't worry what class is, we'll see that in CSS because that's where we are going to use the class. So we have provided a class for both of them. To put it roughly, class is basically when you want to add the same properties, same CSS properties to multiple elements, you can group them together or encapsulate them inside a class. So we have grouped these 2 headings together since we want them to have the same properties. Now we are creating a form. HTML provides a form tag to create a form. It is basically a container element inside which you can provide other elements. So we are providing an ID. Now the difference between ID and class is class groups groups multiple elements together, but the ID is unique for every element. So ID is similar to your identity card, your college ID card. It's different for every person. So here ID is different for every element. Now inside form we need to take 4 things as input. We were taking name, phone number, email, and a drop down box to select the engineering year. So HTML provides a tag called input, using which you can take an input, and HTML input is a self-closing tag. Now, before we get into input, there are basically 2 types of tags: paired tags and empty tags. Paired tags are tags which you need to close. So if you look at head tag, I've opened the tag and closed the tag. Closing the tag is basically add a forward slash in front of its name and you've closed the tag. And within the opening and closing tag, you need to specify the content of that tag of that element. And the next type of tag is empty tags. So if you see your meta tag is also an empty tag, you don't need to close it. It closes itself. And input is also a self-closing tag or an empty tag. So we need to specify the type of input we want. So we're going to take text for name. We'll provide the ID as name. And there's a thing called placeholder where you can provide an example of what you want as an input. So example, I want the name as John Doe. So if you save it, you'll see an input field has arrived or has been placed there. But we don't know what it's for. So we're going to add a label. So label is basically the name suggests label, which adds text or which is used to provide information about the input fields in a form. So it has a for attribute. So you have to specify for which element you're writing the label. So for inside for attribute, you have to write the ID of the input element. So our ID is name. So we want a label for our name element, and we'll just write enter your name. So there we go. We have this, and If we write required as an attribute for an input field, it is basically compulsory to fill that input field or the form will not be submitted. And yeah, this is our first input field. We are taking a name as input and we need three more of these. So we're going to save some time now. We'll just copy paste this. Yep. So, oh yeah, sorry. So we have taken name as input. The next is number. So we'll keep the ID as number. And for example, we need 10 digits. So we'll just add 1 to 0, right? And input also has a type called tel, which is telephone number. So tel takes telephone number as input, not necessarily telephone, but you can also take phone number. And now we want 10 digits as input, nothing more, nothing less. So there's an attribute called pattern where you can specify what type of input you want for the telephone number. So for different countries, it's different, but we'll keep it simple, we'll keep it generalized, and we'll just take 10 digits as input. So the first square bracket implies that any digit between 0 to 9 is valid, and the next specifies the number of digits that we are taking input. So we are taking 10 digits as input, and it could range from 0 to 9 anywhere. So that's the pattern we are providing. So we forgot to change the label, right? And the next is email. We'll keep it simple. Enter your email. For placeholder, we'll provide a dummy email, abc@gmail.com. And HTML also provides an inbuilt type called email, where if you specify the input type as email, HTML implicitly checks for syntaxes if the email is valid. So we don't need to worry about that. Yep. Now the next is a drop down box. Now these were inputs. These are just text or number inputs. Now we want the user to select one of the options that we are going to provide them. So in order to create a drop down box, there's an element called select. Select is basically a drop down box, and inside that you can provide options. So each option we're going to provide first year. Just copy this, second year, third year, and fourth year. BE, TE, and SE. Now there's an attribute of the option tag called selected, where by default one of the options is selected. We don't want the options selected to be none. We'll just keep it as first year. So first year by default will be selected, and yeah, that's it. So we have taken four things as input as decided. Now we need to create a button for submission. We'll set the type as submit, even though every button by default has a type submit, and ID will be submit as well. And we'll add some text. So we have a button for registering or submitting. Now we need an H4 tag. So remember how I told you H1 tag is the main tag, the biggest tag, H2 is a subheading. Now H4 is also a subheading. It's relatively smaller. So we want to show the number of students that have registered. Number of students registered, and by default it's going to be 0. So here you see an H4 tag, number of students registered 0. And then we need another button of type button, not submit, because we don't want to submit the form by accident. Now each button has, as I said, the default type of each button is submit. So if I did not provide this attribute, this value to the type attribute, the full screen button would have submitted the form as well. And default submission of any form refreshes the website, and we don't want that. So we are going to prevent default submission, but that will look in JavaScript. So we have added that, and so that is it for the form element. Outside the form element, we need two more buttons, one button, I guess. So the button is going to be to show the registered students, the names of the registered students. So show registered students. Yep, you can see the button. And then we are adding a div element. Now, what is a div element? A div element is basically a container element of sorts inside which you can contain or write multiple elements. So inside this, we don't want to write any elements for now. We just want the div element for formatting, because you can't format plain text. If I write registration or registered students like this, just plain text, you can't format it. I mean, you need to write separate HTML tags, this tags like B tag, which makes the text bold. But instead of writing all that, we'll just embed the text inside a div element and we'll format the div element in the CSS part. So now that we have everything we wanted, this is the main structure that we wanted to create. We're taking four things as input. We have a register button, we have a full screen button, we have both the headings, we have a button for full screen and one for to show registered students. So this is the basic uh, structure. Now we want to add some layouts to this, because this looks very dull and not at all professional. We don't want the input elements or input fields to be one after the other. We want them to be one below the other. So let's just add some IDs first, because we will need IDs to format these separately. And yep. So we are going to use an external CSS. I explained the three types: inline, internal, external. So inline is basically the style attribute. If I want, I'll write a style attribute here, and then I'll write color as red. So as you can see, the color has changed, but we don't want to use this. This is very messy. It's a good practice to keep your HTML and CSS properties separately. The main structure should be separate, and the properties or the CSS properties that you're applying should be in a separate file. So we are using link tag for that. Link tag is used to link a separate or an external CSS file to the HTML file. Now I'll explain what rel does in a minute. href is equals to styles.css. Now this href provides the source for the file that we are linking. Rel is a relation between the linked file and the HTML document. So we are using CSS, which is for styling. So it's going to be a style sheet. Now href is styles.css. Now we will create a file called styles.css. We'll save it as styles.css. Now the file is linked to the HTML file. Now here we are going to write the main layout or design part. Now, first of all, let's design these two headings. We're going to call the class selector. The class selector is basically, you need to start it with a period or a dot class name, and inside curly braces you can add the properties. Now the properties we are going to add is, we'll change the font family. Font family is basically changing the font of the text. If I change it to Arial, right, now the font has been changed. We want the headings to be centered, which can be done using text align. Text align, we're going to align the center in the center, align the text at the center. That is done. And let's change the color a little. Black is too dark. We'll just go for dark gray, I guess. Yeah, so this looks more subtle. And yeah, that's it. The next, what do we want to, yeah, we want the form element. This is an ID selector, hashtag and ID name. Now the ID of our form element is form itself. So we'll call it hashtag ID name, which is form. Now background, we'll add a background color so you can differentiate between the form element and the other elements. So we'll add B6 FA. This should be purple. Yeah. So as you can see, the form element is clearly visible now. You can see what elements are inside the form and what are which elements are not inside the form. Now, a bunch of CSS properties we are going to be looking into now. The first is padding. Now, padding is the space inside the element. Now, you see how this text and the border of the form element are too close. Even this drop down box is literally on the boundary. So we don't want that. We want some space between the border and the main content of the element. So we'll add some padding. So that looks better. Let's make it 20. Nice. Now the next spacing is called margin. Margin is the space outside the box. So outside the element. So the space between this heading and this border, this is the space we want to adjust. And the same goes for this one. Now, margin property, if you use margin itself, it will set the property for all four sides. So it has left 35 pixels from all four sides. And there is another way to specify the margin, which is specifying two values. So the first one, 35 pixels, is for top margin and bottom margin. The next one, auto, is for left and right margins. So it automatically aligns the element to the center if you use auto. Now we have done that. Let's add a border radius. Now this looks very fun. We'll add 25 pixels. So see how the corners are curved. Now that looks much better. We'll go for a box shadow to make the form look more realistic. So box shadow has a bunch of properties that we will be looking into. And oh yeah, I forgot to tell you this. So there are three ways to set colors. The first is using hex code. So what you just saw here, hex code is using hexadecimal constants. And the next is RGB, which is red, green, blue. These are the primary colors. And combining the intensities of these colors, you can create your own secondary colors. So the range of uh, RGB is 0 to 255. So 255 is the maximum intensity of that color, and 0 is the least intensity. Now we'll use RGBA, which is red, green, blue, and alpha. Alpha is the opacity. So opacity, if I set it to 0, it will be transparent. So there is a shadow currently, but it's transparent. And if I set the opacity to 1, which is the maximum, it will be completely visible. So now you can see a shadow across the element. Now what are these three values? This is for the width of the shadow. This is for the height of the shadow, how much you want the shadow to come out or be spread out. And this is blurring. So we are blurring the shadow by 20 pixels. If I remove this, it will look a little something like this. Now this doesn't look quite good. So we'll keep the blur. Yeah, this looks better. Now we have done that. The next part is to align these input fields properly. And yeah, there is another property that we will be discussing in JavaScript. So no need to worry about it right now. Yeah. So let's set the width to 50% because we don't want the form to cover the entire web page. Yeah, that looks better. And now for the input elements. So we saw a class selector, which is you use a period and then class name, and then you can specify the properties. And class selector, basically you can encapsulate and add the same property to multiple elements. ID selector is used to change the properties of one unique element. And not input, element selector is when you want to select all the elements in present in the HTML file. So when we select input, we are selecting all four of these input elements that are present in the HTML file. And then we're gonna add the properties to all of those elements, the same properties to all of those elements. So first of all, let's make the display block. So what this means is that when the display property of an element is set to block, that means the element begins on a new line. So before it was this input field was beginning right after this text. Now it's beginning on a new line. That's basically all there is to it. Now we'll add some padding. This is all repeated stuff. You just want to repeat the properties, and the values of these properties, you just have to experiment with it. So yeah, that looks better. And what else? Let's add a margin because the text and the input fields are way too close. So again, 15 pixels auto. This is for top and bottom. This is for left and right. And next, uh, yeah, that's it. And yeah, input. Now the next property is very fun. Input focus. So now focus is basically when you click on any element, you see how the border color changed. This is focusing. Whenever you click on an element, you're focusing on that element. So if you want the element to change some properties or certain properties, when you're focusing on it, you can write those inside this. So we want the color to change, the background color. To make it more attractive, we'll make it right. So now when I focus on this, the background color changes to light gray, I guess, and it just looks better. The next is the label. We want to change this text. This text is way too small. So we'll just change that using the same element selector. We're selecting all the label tags in the HTML file. We'll change the font size to 25 pixels or maybe 20 pixels. Yep, let's change the font family. And now there is another property that I want to discuss, which is font weight. Font weight is basically if you want to make your uh, text, if you want to mark your text as bold. So we saw the B tag in HTML, which makes the text bold. If you don't want to use that, if you want to do it using CSS, you can use the font weight property. It has a bunch of values. If you want, you can explore in this. You can see you can either add numerical values or directly select bold or bolder. Bolder is basically if it's already bold, it increases the intensity. So we'll stick to bold for now. Font weight bold. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all we want to add. Let's decrease the text size a little. Mm, the next thing will be to design this drop down box, which we will just make it the entire width. So I think we haven't added an ID for that. The ID should be here. Yeah, we'll just add an ID to the select tag here, and we'll call it using ID selector. Now here, and we want the width to be, let's say 95%. So yeah, 95%. So when I say width 95%, it's not 95% of the web page. It's of the element inside which the drop down box is declared. So it is 95% of the form element, not the web page. So now that we have that, we'll add some padding. As usual, repeated properties. We'll add a margin. And yeah, so let's just add another label element. So if just to make it more accessible. So enter engineering here. Now that that's done, now we have to change the properties of these three buttons, this heading and this div element. So after that, we'll be diving into JavaScript. We're done with the drop down. Now the heading first, or let's work with the submit button first. So the submit button, let's keep the width as 20%. We want it to be not valid in the beginning because the form is not filled, or the details are not filled yet. So we'll change the margin to, yeah. And a button by default is inline. We'll change it to block. Right, now our button is centered. Now we'll add some padding to it. Yep. And let's change the background color. We'll make it dull yellow, which is, I think, yeah. So that works for us. And to bring the not allowed, so we were seeing when we hovered over the button, the cursor changed to not allowed. So we'll just add that. Now, if you hover over it, you can see that we're not allowed to register. I mean, obviously, you can still register, except like you have to fill all this information. But we won't get the alerts that we were getting. That will be done using JavaScript. We're done with that. Let's change the border radius. We'll keep it 100 pixels. Yep. And let's add a transition property. As I said, transition, will look into it in JavaScript because that's where it is going to be used. Transition. So basically, what this means is that we want the width to change in 0.2 seconds. If you want, we'll keep it 0.5 seconds so it's more visible. Now that we're done with the submit button, we'll go for the h4 tag. Uh, we'll just select the tag itself because there's just one h4 tag in the entire file. And then we'll, first of all heading tags are block level elements. So we don't want it to be a block because we know it's gonna take up only this much space. This space is being wasted. So we'll just keep it as inline. Now the difference between inline and block elements is that block elements start on a new line and inline elements start from where the last element ended. So the name itself suggests the element is going to be inline to the previous element. Now we're done with that. We'll add a background color, white. So these are the three ways to set colors. You can either use the color name itself, or you can use RGB values, or you can use a hex code. So I think RGB values is better because you can also use RGBA, using which you can set the opacity. So let's add some padding. That's too much padding. Yep. And then we'll add a border radius of 8 pixels so it looks sleek, and a margin property for the space outside the element. Okay. Oh, and we can change the font family as well. Basically, the font will keep it as monospace. So I'm just trying to explore different fonts in these. So this is monospace, sans serif, and for the heading we use Arial. So by now you should have realized that these are the same fonts that we use in MS Word or MS Excel. Yeah, you can explore more of those. Now that we're done with the heading, let's increase the font size a little. It's not quite visible. Yeah. So now we have to design these two buttons. We can either write the same properties for both of them and full. So this is multiple selector where if you want to select multiple elements to apply the same properties, you can either encapsulate them within a class such as this, or you can just separate them with a comma and add the same properties. but a class is much better. But since we are only adding two properties, we'll just do it this way. So let's add some margin first, and then up some padding. All right, so let's add a background color and a hover property. A hover property is important. Right, now let's increase the font size to 15 probably. Yeah, now that what next is hover property registered. So the same way we wrote the focus property, we're going to write the hover property, the id name or class name or element name colon hover. And this is the same as the event on mouse over, basically what you want to do when the mouse hovers over a particular element. So we want it to transform and scale up to 1.1. So what this means is we want the buttons to zoom in a little when they are hovered over. So basically this is what it looks like. Oh, we haven't added a transition. So this is what I'm talking about. We forgot to add full screen hover. So if you see this, there's a little animation you can add to your buttons where they zoom in when you hover over them. And let's change the cursor to a pointer, because when you're selecting something, you want the cursor to be a pointer. So this looks better. Right. Now we will be adding some properties to the register button separately, because we don't want this button to have those properties. So let's set the display as block and margin as 15 pixels and auto. So now this button is centered. If you want, we can add some more space between the button and the form. And at last we have this div element. Now the div element is, we want to hide it, because we want to show this information only when this button is clicked. So we'll do that using the display property. We will first select the div element using its id registrations, and we'll set the display to none. Now what this does is, I don't think, yeah, it's registration. Yeah, so now you can't see the div element. It has been hidden using the value none of the display property. So this basically hides the element and nothing else. That's all it does. And we are going to change this property using JavaScript. So let's get into that. Our basic layout is done. Let me just check. Yep. So this is the basic layout of our web page. This is a static web page because there is no interactivity, there is no real-time updates happening. This count is not changing even if I submit. So we are going to do that using JavaScript. So let's get back to our HTML file. And at the end of the body tag, we will add the script tag. Now, there are two ways to write JavaScript code. You can either start writing between the opening and closing tags directly. You can write your JavaScript code from here on, or you can link your external JavaScript file to your HTML file. So first, we'll define what type of file we are linking, which is text and JavaScript. The type of file we're linking is JavaScript, and then we'll provide the src. Src is source of the file. So we'll write script.js, and before this we will add a dot and forward slash. Now what this means is that this indicates that the file is in the same directory as the HTML file, so it is easier to locate it. And that's all we need to do in HTML file. We'll now create another file, save it as script.js, and yeah, now we just start writing the JavaScript code. Now, a bunch of things before we start writing the code. There are three types of declarations of variables: let, var, and const. So var is a more outdated version because it's function scoped. Let is block scoped, and var can be redeclared. So we won't get into the details, but var can be redeclared, which is very bad for data security. So we are not going to use var. We're going to use let, which is a modern version of var. They do the same thing. It's a normal variable declaration. Const is another way to declare a variable, but when you declare a variable using const, it cannot be changed or modified in the future. So any value that you don't want to be changed accidentally can be, you can declare it using const. So first let's declare a variable called count using let, and this count is going to keep a count of the students registered, and we're going to update it in update this message with the variable. Now, the next part is very important. It is DOM manipulation or data object model manipulation. DOM manipulation is basically used to access or modify HTML elements in JavaScript. So, how do we access those elements? First of all, you can either access those elements and process them directly, or you can access the HTML elements and store them in a variable. So, we'll do that. We'll store the elements in a variable. So this is the syntax to for the manipulation. We will use get element by ID. So as the name suggests, get element by ID basically means you're accessing the element with its ID name. So you don't need to provide hashtag here. You can directly write the ID name. So this is how you access an HTML element in JavaScript. There are a bunch of other selectors. You can use the query selector instead of get element by ID. Document.query selector, or there is get element by class name, get element by tag name. But get element by ID is quite simple, and we'll stick to that. So we are taking a bunch of elements and storing them in variables. The first is the submit button. We want to change the appearance of the submit button when this is valid. Then we'll take the form itself as input and store it in the form variable. By the way, these are all declared using const because we don't want the values to be changed. We are accessing the elements and storing them, but we don't want those to be modified in the future. So we will just use the same, and we are taking this h4 tag. So basically register a button, this entire form, this heading, and these two buttons. These are the things that we want to take as input. And the part we have hidden below, the div element that we have hidden below, we want to take that as well because we want to show it on button click. So document.get element by ID, and we'll just store it. The ID was count, and yeah, let's just copy this. Right, registered. Ideally, it's a good practice to keep the variable name and the ID name of the element as same. So we'll just stick with that. So we have accessed 6 elements in total from JavaScript from HTML, and what's remaining full screen. Right. So these are the 6 elements we need. Now this is variable declaration. We have declared all the variables. Now the next task is to declare functions, declare and define functions. Now I'll explain how you declare functions in JavaScript. There are a bunch of ways, but we'll stick to the simplest way, which is using the function keyword. Use the function keyword, write the function name, and inside the curly braces you can provide what the function does. Now we are in total we are going to write 5 functions. The first one is update button style. Then we'll be adding the student, which adds the name of the student to the div element that we have hidden. And the third will be to count students, which will update the count and call these two functions. So let's get into it one by one. Just be aware that we are not going to see any changes for now because we are just declaring the functions. We're not calling them yet. So we will call them at the bottom or at the end. So let's first write the functions. So we want to update the button style. Now, for updating the button style, we first need to check if the form is valid. If the form is valid, then we want the appearance to change or we want it to stay the same. So the if statement checks that. So we have taken the form, we have accessed the form element using the manipulation. And now we will check if it is valid using the inbuilt function called check validity. Now this is a function provided by JavaScript. It checks the validity, and if the form is valid, it returns true. So if it is true, what changes do we want to do? Basically the submit, we want to change the appearance of submit button. So we will do that using uh, by accessing CSS properties in HTML, sorry, in JavaScript. So this is how you access CSS properties in JavaScript. You write the element name or the ID name or class name dot style and specify the which property you want to access. Keep in mind though, you want whatever value you want to set to that property needs to be within either double quotes or single quotes. If it is just plain text, it won't be rendered. So keep set the value inside double quotes. We'll set the value to the same color as these buttons, right? So you won't see any changes for now. We also want the width to change. Now this is where the transition property comes into play. We want the width to change, but it won't change directly or suddenly. We have added a transition. Now this transition works the same as transitions in PPTs that we make using PowerPoint presentation. Uh, so yeah, this will basically add some delay in the change. So you'll see it will be the same as a transition. Let's just call it a transition. So these are the two things that we want to change. And the else part of this statement will be if the form is not valid, we want to revert back to the default colors or default changes. So we'll just change those, right? And here it will be 20%. So this we are updating the button style now. And the next function, this is the first function where we are updating the button style of this. So also we need to change the cursor as well. So submit dot style dot cursor. The syntax is same to access any CSS property of an element. You can change the cursor to pointer, and same you can revert back to not allowed. Right. Our next function is add student. We want to add the name of the student to the div element. So we will take the name as input first. So const name is equals to document dot get element by ID, and the ID for this input field is name. So we'll take a name, but we don't want the input field itself. We want the value which was entered in the input field. So anytime you want a value, you just enter dot value of that element. So now you have the value stored in a variable called const. Now inside the registrations part, the element which we have hidden, I'll change the display property of it. So just for the sake of this example, right, you can see this. And while we're at it, let's add the theme properties to this, right? So we don't need to write separate properties for this div element. We can just reuse the properties of this form element that we specified and just add it to these. So now it's centered and we have all the layout ready. So you can see the text now. So registrations.inner.html. Now what is this inner HTML? There are basically two properties, inner HTML or inner text. So when you select inner text, every content or all the content inside this element is taken as plain text, is treated as plain text, and every text or every property or content, whatever you want to add to that element, is also treated as plain text. So you'll see why we are using inner HTML in a minute. So inner HTML basically treats every uh, text or all the content within the element as an HTML property. So we need that actually. So first of all, we'll display the count as a serial number. Now this is called concatenation. We're concatenating two variables together. This is a string constant and this is a variable. So we are concatenating those two. Uh, Using the same concatenation, we're gonna create a string and we will attach or append it. Appending means plus equal to. So this text will remain the same, and at the end of this text, we'll add the string that we want to add. So plus we want to add the name, and here we want to add the BR tag. Now BR tag is the break line tag, which breaks the line and moves the cursor to the next line. So this is why we needed to use inner HTML, because if we had used inner text, this would have been treated as plain text and you would have just seen angular brackets and inside those BR. So this would not have been an HTML property when you use inner text. So that's why we need inner HTML. So that's the second function. Now the third function will be count students. Count students. In this, we are going to do this is the main function. We are going to update the count. We're going to update this message. So before all of that, we need to check if the form is valid. So if form dot check validity, and if the form is valid, we want to do a lot of stuff now. So the first thing we want to do is increment the count. We will just do that. Before that, we want to prevent default submission. So now see, any data that is stored using front end is volatile. So when you refresh the website, it will be erased, it will be gone. So we don't want that. We want the data to stay. So anytime you register and it triggers a default submission. Now default submission refreshes the website and all the data is gone. So we don't want that. We'll just prevent default. This is a function provided by JavaScript to prevent default submission. Now that we are retaining the data, we want to change the message of this h4 tag to number of students registered, and we'll concatenate the count variable. Now before we concatenate it, we'll increment it. This is called pre-increment. So it will be incremented first and then appended to the string. Now that is done, we'll call the add student function, which will add the name to the div element here below this. We'll also call update button, or we'll call that at the end. Now anytime you prevent default submission, the data is retained, which means all the data here will be retained and it doesn't go away. So we want to reset the form for a new submission. So when you want to reset the form, you can always use form.reset, which is used to reset the form. So we have done that. And what else do we need to do? After the form is reset, we will update the button style. And the else part of this also will, let's just send an alert. The alert that we wanted will send an alert, form submission successful. So we will get this alert when the register button is hit. And the else part of this will be just one alert where we tell the users that the form details are invalid or incomplete. Right. So we're done with our third function. Two more functions to go before we wrap up. We'll be done with everything relating to our web page and we'll just see how it works. So the fourth function is a full screen function. We'll take that by at the end. Let's just take a registered students wala button. So we'll write the function show details where we want to show the details of the students. Now here we are going to use something called uh, registrations dot style dot display. Now what this is checking is that the registrations element, this element, is the display property of this element set to none. Now for now it's not set to none. We'll change it. Registrations, yeah, when I set this to none, it's gone. So this statement or this expression will be true, and when it is true, we want to display the element, so we'll just use this and change it to block. Now we saw what happens when you change the display property to block. The element is visible again, and we'll change the text of this button to say hide details. We are showing details, now we want to hide the details. Right, so the same thing will be done in the else part, but the values will be changed. If you are not familiar with if else, it's basically if this is true, do this, else do this. So else will set the display property to none and the text will be show registered students, which is the original text. Right, so that's our fourth function. Now for the fifth and final function, make full screen. So for make full screen, we want to zoom in on the form when the button is clicked. So we have the button, but before that we need to check if the form is already zoomed in, which it won't be, but still form dot style dot transform or transition, not transform not equal to 1.6. So this is what you scale, we just saw scale is used to zoom in or zoom out. If the property is less than 1, let's say 0.5, then it zooms out, and if it's more than 1, then it zooms in on the element. So we're just checking that the form, the transform property of form is not already set to this, which means the form is not already zoomed in, and if it is not, we'll change it to zoom in, the same property, but we'll remove the not, and we'll change the text of this button to windowed, let's say. Yeah, now the else part is also the same. Right, else part, we just want it to go back to normal, so scale will be 1 and we'll provide the original text full screen for this button. Now we're done with all 5 functions. You can't see any changes, so now we'll call those functions. Now we looked at events at the beginning in the PPT. Events are basically what event you want to happen when a particular button is clicked or when a particular element is hovered over. So for register, we want when the submit button is clicked, which is on click, we want to count students, and inside count students we are calling two more functions, which is add student and update button style. But when you want to add two event handlers or two events to the same element, you can use uh, add event listener. Add event listener is used to add an event handler to an element. Now the form element is what we are adding the event handler to. We'll be watching input, and when the input is triggered, we will call update button style because we want the button style to change dynamically. So I think we can see it right now. So if I add the details, you can see that the button changes, and if even one of the details is wrong, the button reverts back, and I can see a alert which says my details are incomplete or invalid, and it will see this is the implicit checking of Gmail or email address using HTML. So it's telling me there should be something after the dot, or the dot is placed at the wrong place. So now my form is valid. If I register, it says submission successful, and even my count is increasing. If I click on full screen, nothing happens because we haven't called that function yet. So full dot on click. I hope the on click event is clear to everyone. On click is very simple. When you click the button, certain function should be executed or called. So we want to make full screen, right? So I think it should work now. Yeah, this doesn't fit because we are in a split screen mode, but yeah. And when you click windowed, it goes back. It reverts back to default. Now the last part is to show registered students, which will be done when the button is clicked. So registered dot on click, we want to call show details function, right? So if I click show details, oh my bad. So I think we have something that we haven't done yet. Oh, okay. Stations dot display double equal to none. Oh, we're checking for equality here, which is bad. We shouldn't do that. Yeah, now it will work. Yeah, you can see the div element has been displayed, and the text for the button has been changed to hide details. When I click on this, the element is hidden again. So that's all there was for that button. You shouldn't really show the applicant's data. I just wanted to show how you can hide and display elements on button click. So this is everything we have done. Uh, we are basically done with the web page. We have made it responsive and interactive, and we have real-time updates. So for example, we'll just take a bunch of inputs. Let's keep it first here. I get an alert, the count increases. So let's try to fill the form in full screen. We'll put the same input and register. Yep. And you can see the data. You can see two Johns. Now the first name is not beginning on a new line because this text is not block level. We can fix that using the br tag. Just add the br tag before, and yeah, it should work properly. So if I add this, and let's select be, and I register. So now you should be able to see the name on a new line. And yeah, the more names you add, they'll just keep incrementing. The count will be incrementing. So that's all from my side. I hope you learned a little something. I am new at this. This is my first session actually. And yeah, that's all from my side. Thank you so much. And I'd like Aishwarya to take the stage now. Also, if I may, excuse me, I have a bunch of projects that they can try out. So it's just three projects. If you want, you can take a screenshot of this. You can make an interactive resume or a photo gallery or a simple blog. All of these should be interactive or responsive. So if you want further projects that you want to make, these are good. These are a good start, I feel. So yeah, that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madhu, for that incredible session. I am sure everyone here has gained valuable insights that will be helpful for all of us to level up our skills during this campaign. From understanding core programming principles to exploring new technologies, you have truly set the bar high. What's to come? As we continue with the Tech Winter Break campaign, remember this is just the beginning. Keep pushing the boundaries, collaborating, and learning together. You have all taken the first step towards a deeper understanding of technology, and I am excited to see how far we can go. Now, it's time to get hands on and apply what we have learned. Stay engaged, stay curious, and let's make this winter break one of our growth and achievement. We have a lot of upcoming projects and campaigns in the future. So, stay connected. Please join our socials by scanning this QR code. Thank you all for being here and a special thanks again to Madhur for sharing his expertise. Wishing you all the very best for in this campaign. But before we end this session, please fill the feedback and attendance form towards the end. A very happy new year in advance to all of you, and I, Aishwarya Avzarpurkar, will see you around.